This next video in our series on structuring and designing effective presentations concentrates on slide structure. Getting your slide structure right can really help your audience understand your points better, and it'll help you become a more confident presenter. This works by ensuring your individual arguments are well crafted whilst also giving yourself a clear and relatively easy role during the presentation. Your slide structure should have these three elements. A clear point in the title. You're going to assert something, not just give a topic. You're going to have evidence to support the point, and this is PowerPoint, which is a visual medium, so that should be visual if possible. And you should have an explanation in the narration. It's really important that you give yourself a role. This is the assertion evidence technique. It was initially developed for scientific and technical presentations, but it's also effective for social sciences, humanities and the arts. So let's look at these in more detail. So what do we mean by clear point rather than a topic? Well, if you look at this slide here, which is a very poor slide, and okay, there's many things wrong with it, but I'm just going to concentrate and focus on the point that it's making, which is to say it's not making any point at all. The title, Transport Cost Characteristics, is a topic, not a point. Looking in more detail, the point seems to be that there are different types of expenses and that these can be categorised as fixed or variable, and that which category they're in will impact the cost structures, which is kind of added as an afterthought at the bottom. So why not just say that point right from the off and not make the audience have to work so hard to understand? So this slide has a point right at the top, a clear assertion rather than a topic. Notice a few other improvements too. It's still got the same text, but having them side by side, it still has the same text, but having them side by side emphasises the duality, and the colour changes are helping to connect things. Here's another example. The word sources is not giving much away. Luckily, I know that this slide is part of a presentation looking at galactose intolerance, and so it's talking about the sources of galactose. It's a very simple slide, and the imagery is obviously focusing on the fruit and vegetables aspect, although it's not really highlighting those fruit and vegetables that are the highest in galactose, but let's leave that for now. What it has is, I think, an implicit point. The implicit point is that galactose is found in commonplace food. So why not put that explicitly as the title, as this slide now does? And this also illustrates the point with more relevant images, especially as it's showing purple fruit and veg, which are the highest in galactose, and that's something that could be expanded on in the narration now. Imagine these headings as the first sentence of a paragraph that you're writing in an essay, and you should get the right idea. So when you assert something in the title of your slide, it has a number of different benefits. First of all, it filters the main point for the audience. They don't need to work out what's the most important point. You've told them that. They don't have to do the additional work to understand that. Secondly, it focuses your attention on the message you're trying to get across, not just on the themes you're covering. And finally, it's a safety net for your audience, because with all the goodwill in the world, not every member of the audience is going to be focusing on your every word throughout. If they drift off for a moment or two, then a meaningful title helps them refocus on what the message of the slide is when they re-engage. Now your assertion, your title, should be a single full sentence of not more than 2 lines of text. Now obviously how long that sentence is in that case would depend very much on the size of the text you've got there, but it really should be a minimum of 32 point. The current title on this slide is actually 44 point, so it could be longer than this sentence. The text on the right is in 32 point, so you could see it's still a good readable size, but you could have a longer point if you needed it. It is best if that is left aligned, because when we're reading full sentences, we tend to read from left to right, so it doesn't work quite as well if you centre it. Here's a quick activity. Come up with a better title for the following slide. Think of a full sentence that sums up the main points of the slide. Just pause the recording while you do that. Okay, so did you come up with anything like these? When we teach this in a workshop, these are some of the answers that many students put forward, but none of them are actually making an assertion. The first two have got more information in them, but they're topics, they're not assertions. Neither of them are full sentences. The last one, what is a common cold, is a full sentence, but it's a question, and it's always best if we can answer questions rather than ask them. The only time you should really have a question on a slide is if you really are asking the audience of something, like this slide is at the top here. Instead, something like this would have worked really well. The common cold is a mild viral infection affecting the nose, sinuses, throat and upper airways. It's claiming something, it is making an assertion. You wouldn't end up with a slide just looking like this though, you'd probably have an image on it like this. There was some other information on there that we could bring in, for example, to explain the different parts of the upper airways. And there was also some information about it being self-treatable to get help from pharmacists. That information could just go into the narration. If it was a really important point in your presentation, then you might want to give that a second slide and have just another one following the initial one. You've always got to remember it takes no more time to move between two slides with very little on them than it does to go through a slide with more on it. Now the evidence on your slide should be there to help the audience visualise your point. PowerPoint is a visual medium, so it's really important that we can try and help the audience visualise things. We do know that people understand more when they're given a mixture of spoken words and pictures. Richard E. Mayer's multimedia learning theories, which are very well established, are based on research. He did a piece of research where he gave the same information in different formats to 3 different groups of people. Group 1, he gave the information in a written format with spoken words in the same way that you would if you were looking at a slide full of text while somebody was talking. Group 2, he gave written words and images, so in the same way that if you're reading an illustrated book. And the third group, he gave spoken words and images in the way that we do when we do a PowerPoint presentation that's got visuals on it rather than text. And when he tested them later for both recall and understanding, when the images were added, recall and understanding was increased. When the words explaining the images came in spoken rather than written form, recall and understanding were highest. This is why television works so well. It's how we evolved to take in information using our visual processing and audio processing abilities together. So with a slide like this, with no visuals, the concept of the lack of warning signals is quite abstract. There's a lot of text, so the audience members are drawn in to read the words and start missing additional information that's being said by the presenter. If instead we just picked a single strong point, like the fact that the tsunami came without any advance warning for locals or tourists, and have that additional imagery that depicts the devastation on the land and the real and human beings running away from the wave, that means the audience engage with the information in a more meaningful and emotional way. All the other information could be left for the narration to give the presenter a role. Some of the information could be transferred to another slide, like with the earlier example, perhaps showing a map of the earthquake position and the areas affected by the tsunami around the Pacific Rim of Fire. It really depends, again, on what is the most important thing in your mind. See how the images play a really key role in explaining and illustrating the points on these slides. Charts are a very effective way of helping people visualise numerical information, as can be seen in the social media example here. And the art history example will be far less effective without seeing these examples. Again, with the psychology example on the left here, showing images of the sleeping and waking brain, we can visualise that much better. And the other slide makes a really punchy point, but again the image makes it more shocking and emotional, making it more impactful and memorable. Even text can be used as a visual. Sometimes we're interrogating a piece of text itself, and that can work well if we show that text and highlight individual parts of it. So here's an example from English, an extract from Great Expectations, and it's got certain words picked out to illustrate and emphasise the point made in the heading. It doesn't have to just be used in English though. Most disciplines require students to interrogate text in different ways. So this example gives a definition and highlights the parts that relate to the point in the heading about equal access. Notice too how colour is used to connect the two things on this slide. Now, if visual evidence is unavailable or if it's irrelevant, be creative with how you present evidence. You might be thinking, why is there an image of an out-of-date pot of noodles on this slide? Well, that's because I want you to think of bullet points like out-of-date pot noodles. Sometimes you really cannot think of anything else to use and they are all that's left in your cupboard. But finding an alternative is always so much better. So instead of this slide with a list of bullet points, could you see how the points relate to each other and make them into a diagram instead? Perhaps like this. It only uses boxes, arrows and text, so you don't need amazing skills to create it, but it really shows the processes more effectively. You can always add some of PowerPoint's own icons to lift it a little. Here's another example, just a list of points. Even if you're not very good at using the drawing tools, you could just use some of the smart art graphics that come with PowerPoint to create a similar effect. I just cut and pasted the original bullet points into a random smart art graphic and then went through them all until I found the one that worked best. People often overlook their narration when it comes to structuring their slides, but it is a vital piece of the whole. Primarily, your narration should explain your slides. You need to make sure the audience can understand what they're looking at. So your narration is used to draw their attention to different things on the slide. When you think of these slides from earlier, you want to let people know what they're looking at. On the left, scans of a mouse's brain with dye showing how cerebral spinal fluid is flushing the brain of harmful toxins during sleep. And on the right, talking through the numbers, explaining that Facebook still had the most users, etc. This is a really easy form of narration because you can use the image to prompt you with what you want to say, but you're not just reading text on a slide, which audiences are known to dislike. In most cases, you'll also add some extra detail. So going back to this slide, my extra detail might be looking at what type of toxins and the processes involved. You would need to remember additional information for this, but the images can help you with your own recall too. And finally, your narration should also explain why it matters, especially in relation to your conclusions and your key points. Going back to this slide, if I wanted to show why it mattered, I can discuss the consequences of it not happening. You might not need to do this on every slide, but it should be part of any key point slides. Here's another quick activity, looking at recognising the assertion evidence technique. Just think to yourself, which of the following slides uses assertion evidence? The answer is slide 2. It's the only one that makes an assertion in the title. And what about this one? The answer is slide 3. Slides 2 and 3 both make an assertion in the title, but only slide 3 is giving evidence to back it up. So to summarise, you need all 3 elements for effective slide structure. A slide title that makes a point, slide contents that evidence or illustrate that point, and narration that explains and shows why it matters. They're all equally important for making your slide structure effective. This is basically an academic argument with a claim, evidence to back up that claim, and an attempt to persuade. The next video will look at presentation design.